Welcome back to Urban Today. Now, if you've been watching this show for some time, you know how I have been mourning about the fact that in our national budget, only 3.1% has been allocated to a sector that employs about 80% of this population. Now, to take that discussion further, I have two gentlemen. One, Mr. Anders Frigad, who is an agroeconomist, comes from a country where just 5% of the population is involved in agriculture. 5 million people in Denmark. Just a section of percentage of that 5 million is in agriculture, and they produce food that is 5 times or thereabout their population. Now, those success stories are what we want to be talking about. Now, these two gentlemen come from Danish know-how, and Anders Frigad, of course, comes from Denmark, and Titus Kasuja, who is the head of the Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan chapter, the regional manager, is here with us. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Anders, how is it? Well, first and foremost, if biscuits and chocolates don't come from Denmark, I don't eat them. So that's how much Danish agriculture has influenced is responsible for my problems with my teeth. Anyway, and I think I'm not alone in that. But the more important question, Anders, here is, how have you been able to do it in Denmark that with just, if I can get my percentages right, what percentage of Danes is involved in agriculture?
We have, as you say, there are 5 million people in Denmark.
Okay. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million.
Of these 5 million, only 100,000 people are farmers. So it's a very small time part of our population, they are farmers.
Okay.
And they produce food, as you say, for 15 million people. I think there are a lot of reasons, of course, for that success story. You cannot just adapt everything to here. What I normally say is that Denmark is a country with not very many resources. We don't have anything coming down from the air. We don't have a lot of resources to take from the underground. Historically wise, in Denmark we have good soil and people. That's what we have. And with those things, well, Denmark has become an agricultural country and very dependent on agriculture.
When you say you have good soil and people, you're talking 5 million people. That's not too many people. How come we are 30 million of us, and in my opinion, we probably could have better soil than you have, and better weather, and we still can't produce enough food to feed ourselves and sell off more?
I think definitely Uganda is a fantastic country with a big potential for food production. It's much more fertile than Denmark, no doubt about that. Of course, it comes down to productivity. How much can one person produce? Of course, a lot of that is about mechanization. If you go to a Danish farm, you will see the structures totally different. But I think also it comes down to the productivity of each person and maybe the status that the agriculture has in Denmark. Like in Denmark, a farmer and agriculture, that's a business, that is a professional business. In Uganda, what I've seen so far is that most of the farming you have in Uganda is not a business. It's something you do to survive in your family. So I think that's one key, is to move it from being this micro-farming to a level where you can call it an actual business.
Okay, we'll get back to you, Anders. Now, Titus Kasuja,
yes, sir.
What were the shocks that you encountered as far as Danish farming is concerned when you first saw what the Danes are doing compared to what you grew up seeing in agriculture?
There are many shocks. There are many shocks. I've been in Denmark for the last close to 22 years. By the time I arrived in Denmark, the cost of sugar, the cost of milk is still the same after 20 years.
You're saying that the cost of milk and sugar has not changed?
It has not changed.
In 20 years?
Or if it has changed with slightly.
It's such an insignificant change, you can't even talk about it.
You cannot. You cannot.
And in those 20 years, in Uganda, I think the price has probably tripled.
More than triple.
More than triple.
More than triple.
Yes.
When I went to Denmark, that is close to 21 years ago, my first ambition was to become a farmer. I went to a farming college, and during my practical period, I went to a farm where I started working. But unfortunately, I couldn't stand it. The farming of Uganda, which I knew, was far different from the other end.
Yeah, you expected to be given a hoe and
Everything. And the Danes, their farming, I cannot tell, but he knows better. When I read literature from so many years ago, I see that they revolutionized their agriculture so many years ago. Everything is done with machineries. You can find a farmer with more than 10,000 pigs, 20,000 chicken, only a wife and a husband are caring for that. The rest is mechanization.
you're saying that somebody runs a farm where he has 10,000 pigs.
Yeah.
And I'm told pigs are high maintenance.
Yeah.
I mean, they require quite some amount of care.
Yeah.
And we know, I mean, from growing up around chickens, I know that chickens, I think I grew up, my dad was keeping about 6,000 of them and mixing the feed and doing all this. I mean, it was work, even just watering the chickens. Now you have 20,000 chickens, you have 10,000 pigs, and it's just a man and his wife.
Yes.
Anders, how do you do these things?
Well, I think Titus, he touched on something important, that it's very difficult to be a farmer in Denmark. They have been used to having a massive pressure on them to every year increase their productivity. Because if you don't have a high productivity, you're out of the production. So I think
who brings this pressure on the farmer? Is it the economy, or there is a policy that demands that if you are into farming, this is the productivity that is expected of you?
I think when it comes to end, it's the consumers. It's the consumers who demands the high quality, the low prices, and so on. So I think everything comes from the consumers. Of course, if the consumers, they want something, they want that it's produced in a good way with animal welfare and good for the environment, well, that pressure goes through the politicians and it comes to the farmers. So only the best farmers and the most efficient farmers really in Denmark, they have survived. So it's a very tough business. Even when describing how it is to be farmer in Denmark, you can sometimes get the thinking that it's very easy. But the fact is that only about the 30% most effective of the Danish farmers, they are actually profitable. So it's a very tough business.
Yeah. Now, Anders, I want to become a farmer myself. I don't have that lot of money. How can I transform from subsistence farming, growing just a few crops? I did try last year to start off with tomatoes. Excuse me. Those didn't come off very well because I have to keep them, then come to my office job, which is what I'm doing now, and then the labor. And so how do I transform from that subsistence farming to the business that you're talking about without necessarily a lot of money?
I think in agriculture on that level you explain, you can grow slowly. You can start with a small area and do that very efficient. And of course it's very easy to say that you have to get a high productivity, but that's actually it. And the margins in agriculture, if you talk about chickens or tomatoes, the margins that you actually get per hectare or per chickens are very low. So therefore you have to focus on every detail, to focus on the difference on 5% on your cost. Make sure that you buy the feed the cheapest places.
Those
and do
if
it
you're watching us,
so
those are certainly pictures from Denmark. That cannot be Uganda, for obvious reasons. As you now that's what we're used to. That's a high yield. But if this was Denmark, you'd expect something like that to be picking those tomatoes.
yeah, but I don't think it's necessarily large scale. I mean, you can be efficient on small scale, and that's the important. That even if you have half a hectare, a quarter hectare, you can still be efficient. Even if you do all the growing by hand, you can still be efficient.
Talk me through, when you say you can still be efficient, how do I know I have taken 90 or 95% productivity out of my farm? How do I know that I'm being efficient or I'm just being sloppy?
I think what is needed is to have some benchmarking, to have some measurements, to say on 1 hectare of tomato, the potential is this, the cost should be this, the income should be this, the number of kilo per hectare you can expect are this, and then you can measure your production up against that. And I think that is one of the problems here, that if you're a micro farmer, you produce on a very small area, well, you just produce and you're happy with the tomatoes you get, and
Yeah.
you get it food enough.
Because
But you don't really optimize it and say, this is actually the potential. So I think on what we have in Denmark is like an advisory service who delivers something like a budget that you can follow, and you can say, well, this is the target, this is the potential actually out of this soil that I have. It should be possible to have this yield, and you can see if you can change something to be more efficient. And I don't think, and that is natural of course, but a micro farmer is not thinking that way. But if you want to move to a business, you have to do that. You have to follow some budgets and optimize every day.
I think that's, we've had the National Agriculture Advisory Services, which were supposed to do that. Whether they did that or not is another matter. But Titus, where is the problem? I don't know whether your parents are involved in farming, but mine were. But the question is, how can the farmer watching this in Arua or in Soroti get to know that from this 50 by 100 plot, they have received as many tomatoes as they should have received? How can that be translated?
Actually, what I've noted, because I've been in Denmark for 20 years, and the rest of my life I've been here in Uganda. So here, farming is like for peasants without education. And today, the one most important thing I've noted is that these people from the village, they fear to get new awareness. That is education. When you tell someone that you come and do a course, come and do education, so that you can improve.
Now that's Ugandan farming.
Yeah, you can't find this one anywhere in the world except in Uganda. In Denmark,
No, you can find it in Malawi.
In Malawi.
That is typical sub-Saharan farming.
Yeah,
Definitely, yes.
It's actually is responsible for our poverty. Yes, you're saying that the difference between here we don't want to know.
yeah,
We cannot do anything that our grandfather didn't do. You tell somebody change from this, say, no,
They
this
don't
is
want
what
to
my
change. They don't
grandfather
want to
did.
change.
But you see, I always tell them, when you tell me my grandfather did this, I ask you, did he own a car? And you said no. Did he own a high-rise building? And you said no. Now that's the reason why you don't need to be doing what he did. If you continue that way, then you're going to be as broke as he was. So referring to your grandfather who was as unsuccessful as you were, I think that's dangerous. Anders, isn't it?
No, I think you're right. Everything is different now, and I think one thing is also to make it attractive to become a farmer.
Okay.
And I think that's one fact that you see everywhere in Africa actually, is that it's not very attractive. It's not a dream for young people to be a farmer. And it should be actually, and it's possible. You have good land, you have people, you have potential markets that you can sell to, so you can do a good business with farming, but it's not the perception of most people that farming could be a business and you can make a good living and buy a car, as you say. Yeah?
Anders, how are we going to make farming? You're touching on a very important subject here. How are we going to make farming as attractive, for instance, as politics? Because lately everyone wants to be a member of parliament, and I think that's because of their salaries and their iPads and the sort of things that they get. How are we going to make farming so attractive that even we will struggle to have MPs because everybody is now dying to become a farmer? How do we make farming attractive?
Well, it's about showing examples, isn't it? I mean, it's something, if you live in a village and all people, they have the same kind of micro farming, and as you say, they do as their parents did and as their grandparents did. Well, you need to change that, and you need them to focus in a new way and make it attractive for them. So if you can take just a few examples and help them to a level where you can see, by growing tomatoes at small scales, you can grow and you can get a car in the future. So it's finding some tools to help just a few persons from the beginning to make them success, right?
We're going to take a break, but when we return, I want us to talk about to what extent policy at government level and parliamentary level has been responsible for the sort of success that the Danish people are making. And that's when we come back from the break. And maybe if we have time, I'll ask him why Denmark is not in the World Cup. Let's get into the break.
This is Urban TV.